Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 10 of season 2 of Arrow. And this is it. The show is back after its little winter vacation. And we come back to, honestly, what feels like kind of a fairly typical episode. It's not that it's a bad episode by any measure, and a lot of stuff does move forward nicely. It's just that not the most exciting episode of this series. But anyway, but then again, we really did leave off on quite the kick last time, so maybe it's not so bad that they slowed things down a little bit for this one. Anyway, let's kind of get into things. Let's just start talking about the small stuff and work our way up. First of all, the island was kind of, I think, a yawner this week. Just sort of seeing where Slade is, and I did like that line of him saying to Oliver, you're the one that she cared for. Very nicely done there. Good stuff from Manu Bennett. And I remember reading an interview with the creators where they basically said the way Slade is acting is actually based on good old-fashioned roid rage, which is what they thought would be the closest real-world equivalent to somebody who got hepped up on Mirakuru. Okay, well, there's that, but beyond that. Moving on to other stuff. Now, the villain this week is based on the character from the comics called Shrapnel. Here, it's supposed to be his internet nickname. Shrapnel's a character I've seen him once or twice in the comics, but actually, I checked the DC wiki before I came over here to do this review, and there's really doesn't seem to be a lot of information about this character. He's pretty much not a terribly well fleshed out villain. Although I did notice that they appear to have kept his real name. It's like Sheffer or something like that, which is briefly mentioned in this episode. And, overall, he has a very vaguely defined, just anti-government movement sort of thing. And honestly, the best part about Shrapnel was just seeing the way Oliver just took him down with a simple, yep. Now, one thing that was interesting, though, is it mentions that the website he was hanging out on was for an anti-government group called The Movement. Now, The Movement is actually the name of a series from DC Comics, which follows a group of people of the same name. It's not one that I've read. I'm really not very familiar with it. But from what I've just picked up from a glance at the internet, it seems to be sort of like what you get if you gave those sort of like Occupy people some superpowers. And beyond that, the only thing I really know about that series is one of the characters in it is Sarah Rainmaker, who I'm a big fan of from the days of the comic book series Gen 13. That was a series I was hugely into when I was younger. And if you actually go back and look in those comics, you will find letters that they printed from me, back in the day when comic books still printed letters from their fans. So, yeah. Gen 13 and the characters. The Rainmaker was never my favorite, but I always did like her. She's actually quite interesting, but not terribly relevant to what we're talking about here. But anyway, let's kind of move on. Now, the stuff with Thea and Roy. That was actually fairly nicely done. They're definitely working a slow boil with what's happening with Roy. But I like that he's not ready to tell Thea what's going on with him, but he is honest with her, and he says to her, like, look, I'm going through some stuff, and you are the only thing that's keeping me afloat. And I like that Thea really quickly picks up that there is more that meets the eye going on with Roy. Like his whole thing of, I heal quickly. She doesn't buy that for a second. She knows something's going on. But, yeah. That definitely is going to move things forward. And I'm kind of wondering, since they have a little bit of a trio thing going on, how long it's going to be before Sin finds out what's going on. In fact, I think it'd actually be kind of interesting if maybe Thea went and talked to Sin and said, maybe you can help me get Roy to open up about what's going on with him. I'm really worried about it, which would certainly be kind of an interesting development. Now, another thing about this episode is that we get some more insight into what's going on with Sebastian Blood as a character. For the most part, right up until now, he's very much been just sort of nice guy politician on the surface, but just villain, villain, villain underneath. And here we see a little bit more about what makes this guy tick. And while he's still obviously quite villainous, here just the story, you get to see. Well, you get to see at least you get to develop at least a little bit of sympathy for him. And he comes from a very bad background. He probably had to he killed his own father at a young age, possibly to protect his mother, possibly not. It's a little unclear. But given the way that Mom reacted, it sort of seems like she believes that he killed his dad in cold blood. Interesting choice of words there, but whatever. And of course, there's the whole situation of him apparently being willing to ally with Oliver. You think that Oliver would be a little bit more wary of this, especially given his. You really think that Oliver would be a little bit more wary about putting his faith in a politician. But then again, Blood has shown that he's not a man without courage, and he's a guy who apparently walks the walk and talks the talk. So maybe Oliver is making a little bit of an alliance with Blood as, doing what he thinks Tommy would have wanted him to do. Which is really about the only reason I can see him making any sort of really official tie with someone like Blood. I mean, yes, he seems to be a decent guy, but he's also a politician, and Oliver is a vigilante. You think that someone in Blood's position would be a little bit less wary of having any sort of real connection with a vigilante who's probably still wanted for at least 26 counts of murder. But hey, it makes for some dramatic stuff. And it actually gave Laurel something to do. Wow. I mean, she's still not in a good place. We see her popping pills this episode, but finally Laurel's actually out there doing something that makes her seem like a smart and driven person. So definitely some big points there. So now let's kind of get into more of the meat of this episode. Before I forget, did you notice in the opening, now when you see Oliver turn to look at the arrow, instead of the face paint, he now has the proper mask. And we even hear Thea refer to the vigilante as the Arrow. So apparently the name is catching on outside of Oliver's little circle. Okay. So anyway, let's get into this thing all of this that from what I can tell seems to be the only thing that the Arrow fans on Tumblr are talking about, and that's what's going on with Oliver and Felicity this episode. And of course, we continue to see that Oliver is still pretty jealous of what's going on with Barry. And what I like about that whole thing where he snaps at Felicity is she doesn't tolerate this for 1 second. As soon as he starts being a jerk, she is right in his face, confronting him about this and standing up for herself. This is not the same rather meek Felicity Smoke we were first introduced to last year. And I really like how, at the end, Oliver just admits, I was wrong. And he even tells her that, you are part of my team. It's very similar to the sort of speech that he's given to Diggle in the past. But here, really 100% making it clear that Felicity is also his partner in this. That she's not, his secretary. She's not his tech girl. He's not his Girl Friday or anything like that. She is a member 100% of this team. And of course, that whole putting his hand on his shoulder. Oh my, do the Tumblr fans love that. Well, who knows, folks? Who knows? Now, of course, we do have some mentions made of Barry Allen. I was just reading an interview with the producers of the show, and they basically were asking, like, okay, now that episode 20 of the series is not going to be a backdoor pilot for The Flash, what are you guys going to do? And they're like, we're still figuring that out. Which is, I guess, a little bit worrisome, seeing as how that's just not that far down the road. But I have confidence in the shows, the people behind the scenes at the show, because they've delivered far, far more than they have failed us. And speaking of the folks at the show delivering, that the stunt work they did with the motorcycle in this episode was really pretty well done. I mean, it wasn't quite up there that really nice action that we had with Oliver and Solomon Grundy fighting on the truck. But still, that was some really nice stunt work. And keep in mind, this is all being done on a television budget. Again, really good stuff there. And let me see here. Oh yeah, the only real major quibble that I seem to have with this episode is that security at that rally must have really sucked, because nobody tries to stop Diggle from dicking around with the sound equipment, or seems to notice that there's what's obviously a bomb inside this thing. I mean, seriously, you'd think that someone would notice that. And I just love how Felicity and Dig are standing there talking about, like, okay, we need to disarm this bomb, and there's just people standing around, and nobody seems to be noticing this at all. But a little bit of suspension of disbelief is certainly required for a show like this. And I'm just taking a glance at my notes here. Yeah, I really don't. I think that pretty much covers everything I had to say about this episode. Again, not the strongest episode of the series ever, but it moves most of the major subplots along. It's only the main story this episode that's a little bit on the weak side, but still, it's definitely an enjoyable hour of television. And never complain about that, right? Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Future Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.